Hello, I'm Delia and welcome back to my channel and to the third video in my series that started it all, my summer reading project. If you want to know more about it, you can check out my first video because that's where I talk about what this project is. The short version, it's basically a fancier TBR list for the summer just because I wanted to make it sound more interesting in order to motivate me to read more, which it definitely did. This is my third video in that series, which took me a lot of time to didn't take me a lot of time to do, but took me a long time to decide what I want to do with it, because I'm still not sure how I want to go about doing book reviews and talking about books. And I'm going to share with you some of my struggles with filming myself and I don't know, building this channel. One of the reasons I wanted to start this channel is because every time I would watch book reviews, I felt first like I didn't really find people that read the same things that I do, which is mainly classics, because I'm fancy like that. But I didn't really find people that read what I like to read, and if they did, I always felt like I wanted them to go more in depth in their videos. What does that mean? I couldn't tell you exactly, and I realized that I don't know, because now I have kind of like a dilemma about what I want to say in my videos. I want to talk about books. That's a clear part. But when you talk about books, there are a lot of things you can talk about, and I'm not exactly sure how I want to go about going more in depth than just making a review. Not that it's wrong to just make a review. Reviews can definitely be fun to watch and useful, but again, I wanted to do something that goes more in depth, not knowing what that means exactly. And this not knowing proved to be a problem to me, and it created some difficulties, because now I don't know what I want to do in my videos. Last time I said that I want to do a video that's more about the author rather than just the book. So talk about the novel, but also talk about the author and her other works. And that is because in the case of Alice Walker, I also read The Color Purple, which I obviously loved, and which is a very popular book. So I wanted to talk about it. But then I realized you cannot really talk about the work of an author when you only read two of their novels. Me doing that would mean that I would need to read more of Alice Walker, which is not necessarily something bad, but again, it requires a lot of time. And do I want to do this, or do I want to just keep this channel fun and talk about my opinion? I don't know. Then I thought, okay, I'm not going to talk about the author because that might take too long, but let's just do a video about the two novels and compare them. But then it felt, trying to do that and to create a script for that felt like writing a paper for university. And I was thinking, well, that sounds quite dull and uninteresting. Maybe the problem is that I am uninteresting, or I don't have any interesting ideas anyway. And I scrapped that idea too, and we're left here with this video where I'm going to do kind of a review. I think like I did with the Brave New World. Maybe that is what I need to do, and I need to polish that style. Well, I do a review, but at the same time I go more in depth with a kind of a book analysis, if you want, and give my interpretation of what happens in the book. This is the plan for now, so hopefully I will discover at some point what exactly means going more in depth when you do a book review. Before we start with the book review, a little bit of an update on my summer reading project. For me, July was a good reading month because I read 4 novels. August was absolutely disastrous. I realize now that we are towards the end of August, and I don't know when it finished. For me, it still feels like it's the 1st of August. I started like 3 books. I didn't finish any, so it's going pretty bad. That being said, still a success because I read more this summer than I read last summer. So let's keep an optimistic perspective over all this. And another thing that I am proud of, I started reading this month. I started reading The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. This book was part of my summer reading project, but when I added it to that list, in my head I was, it's probably like a 10% chance I'll touch this book because it's thick, and I'm proud of me for actually touching it and reading like 70 pages. But I must be honest, I'm not sure if I'm gonna finish it. I would really love to do a video about it because it's very controversial and it has this aura around it that makes it very interesting. But I'm really struggling with this book and I don't know exactly why. I think it, it might be Rushdie's style. And that's not to say that he's not a good writer, because the beginning of the novel is, I would say, is absolutely brilliant and I really loved it. But after that, I don't know, it feels like it drags on. And in a way, it has a rapid pace, because like in 70 pages you find out about the life story of the two main characters. Something about the writing style makes it difficult for me to go through with this book, but I'll try to keep at it. I'm not giving up yet, and having this incentive of I really want to film a video about it definitely gives me that extra push to not just DNF it. So this is the update. That's what I'm doing. Now let's get into the video review, analysis, whatever this will be. In this novel, while it is a fictional story, the author drew from her experiences with the civil rights movement. If you're not familiar with Alice Walker, she is a Black American woman who was involved in the civil rights movement in the 60s. So this book deals with that historical event and how it impacted the people at that time. Because of this, I feel like before we go any further, I need to make two very big disclaimers. The first one, which I think is very obvious from my ghostly complexion: I'm not black. I haven't dealt with any kind of discrimination. Whatever I say, it's only from the point of view of a person who analyzes a book, a novel, and its themes, not from a person who wants to make commentary on the state of the position of black people in society and so on. Second disclaimer that I also think it's relevant. I'm not American. I've mentioned before, I'm from Europe, Eastern Europe to be more precise. So I'm pretty far from the States. I've never lived there. I've never been there. So everything I know about the US, it's from books, from novels, from all art and the culture that is shared globally. Because of that, I might have, let's say, a superficial perspective over the event, because first of all, I haven't lived them, and second of all, I haven't lived in those parts of the country where people, even if they haven't lived through those experiences, they can see the impact and the effects they had on their family, friends, and so on. Everything I'm going to say is going to be from the perspective of a person who has had no kind of experience with the events that are in the novel. I'm not making any kind of social commentary on the situation and how it was in the past or now. It's only based on how I interpret this fiction. Bear that in mind. But I'll try my best to be as respectful as possible. Disclaimers out of the way. Let's start with the review. Finally, Meridian follows the story of the main character, whose name is, and you guessed it, Meridian. She is a black woman who becomes involved in the civil rights movement, and the book follows her experience with the movement and her trying to process everything that happens around her, and her trying to find herself, find her purpose, and also find connection to her own community. In the beginning, we meet Meridian while she's marching, and she gets reconnected with her ex-boyfriend, lover, whatever you want to call him, called Truman. And then we start to go back and start learning about Meridian's history and experience. At the beginning, we are taken through a brief history of three black women that are relevant for Meridian's own growth. Her mother, Mrs. Hill, the wild child, and Louvigny. These are three women that first reflect the experiences of black women throughout history, and then they also reflect a part of what Meridian struggles with. They're also meant to show how Meridian feels at first disconnected from these women and from her heritage, you could say, and then her journey consists of rekindling this connection to her foremothers. The first woman, I don't know exactly if she's the first, because the novel seems kind of scattered. But the first, as in the one that is the furthest back in history, is a slave woman called Louvigny. She was deemed ugly. They also didn't think she was fit to take care of the children, so the kitchen was the only place for her to work. What's special about her is that she is a storyteller. Even though she didn't take care of children, all of the children on the plantation would kind of gravitate towards her because she would tell these interesting and gruesome stories that would intrigue children. She has stories she tells about a black man who kidnaps white children and plants them in the ground in order to feed his snake. Of course, when the owners hear about the stories she tells the children, they punish her, and the punishment is cutting her tongue. This cutting of the tongue is very symbolic because you have this slave woman who is utterly powerless, but she reclaims some of the power she lost because of slavery through her storytelling. After she gets her tongue cut, she takes her tongue and plants it underneath a scrawny magnolia. So you have this area of trees. She chose to plant this tongue underneath the smallest and least likely tree to survive. And once she does this, the tree starts to grow bigger than all the other ones around it. And because of this, the other black people attribute magical powers to the tree. And this tree is also relevant because we have an episode at Meridian's college where some students start to protest. The thing they choose to do is to destroy the tree because it's a symbol of oppression since it was planted by black slaves. Meridian has a different perspective over this tree. What is kind of ironic is that the college wanted to cut down the tree in order to build a new building, but Meridian protests this because she finds that the tree has spiritual importance, and it's kind of a legacy of this forgotten woman ultimately, because Louvigny was just a simple slave. It wasn't like she could leave anything behind her that would make people remember her, but she has this tree that is her legacy, and Meridian doesn't agree with the cutting down of the tree because it means getting rid of the legacy of this woman who otherwise would have been completely forgotten. So this is the story of Louvigny. Then we get the story of Meridian's mother. She starts out as a quite ambitious young woman. She wants to be a teacher. She doesn't have any desire to have children or anything like that. So she has her own personal ambitions that are, let's say, outside of what's normally expected from women in society. At one point, she sees women with their children, and she gets this feeling that they have something that she doesn't, that there is a world they have access to that she doesn't, and they look at her with pity because she doesn't experience this world of motherhood. After this, Meridian's mom gives birth to Meridian, which makes her realize that it was a mistake because it's not what she wanted, and she realizes those women didn't look at her with pity but rather with envy because she was free to do whatever she wanted. She wasn't tied down to a family and to a child and to a husband. She could go forth and follow her own dreams and ambitions. Thing that she can no longer do when Meridian gets born. Meridian's mom regrets giving birth and regrets having a child because she realizes that it's not all that she thought it would be. And this arouses feelings of resentment in her, resentment that she ultimately puts onto Meridian. So Meridian gets born, let's say, with this feeling of guilt because she took away her mother's independence. Before we start talking about how these women relate to Meridian's experience, there is one more I need to mention, and that is the wild child. Wild child is not a woman, she's a child. An abandoned girl that appears somewhere near Meridian's college, but she dies very young. When she dies, they decide to bury her near the stump of the tree that I mentioned before, Louvigny's tree, and Meridian marches with the coffin with the wild child's body in order to make sure that she gets a proper burial. So this is something that Meridian fights for. And the story of these three women reflect the harm of society's expectations and views for women. Even though black people were fighting for freedom and for their rights, women still aren't able to find their own selfhood. Their role is still seen as a supporter, as a caregiver, as someone who is there for the men in order to help them and support them. This is kind of the role that Meridian's mom falls into without her wanting to do so. It's worth mentioning that Meridian starts kind of on the same path as her mother. So in high school, she gets pregnant because sexual education doesn't exist. She doesn't know what to do in order to prevent this. When this happens, she gets married and she is quickly put in that role of the wife who takes care of the child and of the husband. She has to give up school, obviously, as opposed to her mother and other women in her life. Meridian chooses to abandon her child in order to go to college, which makes her feel guilty because of the history of slave women. Whenever a woman was pregnant and gave birth, it was entirely up to the owner what would happen with that child. Maybe they could take care of it for like a few years and then the child be sold to someone else. Maybe the child would get taken away right away and the mother would never see it again. That being said, she still goes on with her decision, which proves to be the right choice. That's something else that this novel makes you realize. When you are put in difficult situations, when you have a life that is full of burdens, let's say, you get to a point where there are no right choices. In the end, Meridian, after all of these experiences, after learning about her mother's life and the life of the black women before her, she has to grapple with her relationship with her heritage, which ultimately she realizes she can do by giving voice to the women and by fighting for this movement, but fighting in her own way, because we come to see that she doesn't agree with everything that happens in the movement and she needs to find her own path, let's say, because any path that she chooses to take, it's too restrictive. Speaking of difficult situations and making difficult decisions, there is another character that I want to talk about, and this time it's a white woman named Lynn, who marries Meridian's love interest. When she's in college, Meridian chooses to join the movement, the civil rights movement, and there she meets Truman, who is this bohemian character. We are told that he dresses in African clothing. He only speaks French, so he has this aura of, my impression, he has this aura of a very interesting hipster. But anyway, Meridian falls in love with him. They do have a relationship, but ultimately he chooses to marry a white woman called Lynn. Now, their relationship doesn't really work. There's no kind of relationship that works in this novel. Lynn has this, let's say, idealized perspective over black people. She sees them as art. She's removed from their experience, so she doesn't have the pain of living through the racism in the US. So she sees their life as art and she's very drawn to it, which makes her leave her family because her family disown her basically, and go and fight alongside black people for the civil rights movement. So she marries Truman. They have a relationship. They also have a child, but it doesn't really work out. Truman starts to be interested again in black women, and he has this kind of back and forth uh, when it comes to his love interest. But there is a scene with Lynn that was pretty traumatic, and maybe I'll give this maybe a content warning because I will talk about this word right here. There is a scene where one of the people from the movement, whose name is Tommy Odds, he was a victim of an attack and he is left without a hand, and he comes onto Lynn and her. Lynn in that moment is put in, I think, into a very difficult and painful position, because on one hand she is assaulted, there's no question about it. She doesn't consent, she doesn't want him to do anything with her, especially since he's Truman's friend, so she has absolutely no interest. But at the same time, she is very aware of how white women, historically speaking, weaponize their vulnerability in order to punish black men. So she feels guilty for that. She has this historical guilt that she grapples with, which makes her ultimately accept the. And at the end, she has a part where she tells him something within the lines of "I forgive you. I'm not going to go around and tell people and then authorities about you, because I know if I do that, you will be punished very severely." Which he should be, shouldn't he? But at the same time, again, she in her situation, she cannot look past the history of white women and black men. And Tommy, he finds it absolutely hilarious. At some point, he takes all of his lads, not British, but I like this word, in order to have a go at her, which is absolutely disgusting. Lynn obviously has to live with this trauma, and she tries to talk to Meridian about it. But Meridian, at that point, she tells her, "I don't want to know. Doesn't interest me. Please don't talk to me about it. I don't want to know." So she kind of dismisses her, which is understandable because Meridian's energy is focused towards black women and black people and helping them. So it's understandable why she says this. At the same time, I couldn't help but feel sorry for Lynn, because there's no point where you can justify what Tommy does to her. But at the same time, how do you grapple with the history? So especially if you're a white woman who wants to be, part of the solution, how do you grapple with it, knowing that if you choose to take action, you will be taken seriously, but it will be to the detriment of the movement altogether. At the same time, she has all the right to, I don't know, to be upset about it, obviously, because that's something that nobody should be going through. As you can see, there are a lot of contradictions, a lot of complexities in this novel, and that is ultimately what it highlighted for me, how nothing is good or bad. Wow, the revelation of the century, isn't it? The civil rights movement, while it did a lot to fight for the rights of black people, it also didn't do enough to fight for the right and for the freedom of black women. Her work revolves around giving voice and highlighting the struggles of black women within a movement that fights for freedom but still oppresses the women within that community. I felt like I talked a lot. Hopefully you got something out of it. At the end, my overall impression of the novel. I definitely liked the color purple more. I think it was more captivating. Sometimes, even if it's a short book, and it's not difficult to read by any means, but because it's so scattered, sometimes it's difficult to follow, and there are details that I don't remember just because they didn't really flow with the rest of the story. There is absolutely no likable character in this novel. If you read this for entertainment and not so for me this was more of a academic read, let's say, because it might be part of my dissertation, so I read it with that in mind. But if you read this for entertainment, I will tell you this: there's no character that you want to root for, because all of them do something that makes them horrible people. Meridian, already said, she does abandon her child, which is understandable because she wants to go and get an education, because she didn't want to be a mother. She didn't know, she wasn't told about, like Meridian's mom, she wasn't told about what that means. If you were to get the child's perspective, you might get a different story and she might be even more unlikable. Truman, Meridian's love interest, is unlikable because he objectifies women, he objectifies Meridian, he objectifies Lynn. He doesn't really care about women's freedom. I found him quite superficial. Maybe something escaped me, or maybe Walker tried to do something that I didn't understand, but yes, still unlikable. Meridian's mom is a mom that resents her child and makes her feel guilty for being born, so again, horrible person. Lynn also kind of objectifies black people in a way. She sees being part of the movement as something interesting to do. All the characters in the novel are unlikable. Go in with the right expectations, because you might get at the end of the book and hate everybody except Louvini. I think I really like, but again, she's present only for one chapter of the novel. The characters who appear all throughout the novel, they are all kind of unlikable, and I can't help but think that this is somewhat intentional, because the author wants to show how difficult it was to live in that period, and how even if, again, even if they were trying to do something good and noble, uh, people were still horrible. There were very difficult situations that put you in this position where whatever you choose, you're still gonna be a bad person. Because for Meridian, if we think about her abandoning her child, yes, she could have chosen to continue being a mother, but she probably would have ended up like her mother, meaning resenting her child and not being a great parent anyway. So we are by no means encouraged to judge the actions of the characters, but rather we are encouraged to see the complexity and how difficult it was to go through that, keeping your hopes and continuing to fight for a cause that at some point might seem hopeless. So that was my takeaway from the novel. This was my review, analysis, whatever you want to call it, about the book. I know I was quite chaotic, but that's again because I don't know exactly what I want to do with these videos, and I feel kind of stuck. And it's very easy to just give up and spend, I don't know, days, weeks on writing something or writing a script that goes nowhere. So I'm thinking if I do videos, I'll then have something to look back on and analyze and see what I like, what I don't like, and what I want to change for the future. Next, I really want to do a video on Orlando. But for Orlando, I do also want to reread A Room of One's Own, because in that case I think it's relevant and I already have an idea of what I want to touch upon. You can look forward to that, but I'm not going sure when I'm going to do it. I'm getting quite discouraged with my summer reading project, but I'm not letting that bring me down. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed my review, analysis, rambling about Meridian, and I'll see you in the next one.